As we turn the page on 2025, we're looking back at the biggest events, developments, and trends that shaped organized crime in Latin America this year. In Colombia, President Gustavo Petro's ambitious attempts to negotiate peace with Colombian criminal groups faced repeated setbacks in 2025. For this week's narrated story, we're sharing one chapter from our year-end GameChangers series, which analyzes the ups and downs of Petro's total peace plan over the past year. 2025 also marks 10 years of our GameChangers annual roundups. Using a decade of systematic monitoring, we give you the context you need to understand both recent dynamics and the broader patterns behind them. This is Colombia's Total Peace Remains in Pieces, written by Sara Garcia and read by me, Henry Schuldener. In 2025, Colombia faced levels of violence not seen in years, driven by clashes among criminal groups that have strengthened their military power and territorial control in areas critical to illegal economies. While critics blamed President Gustavo Petro's Paz Total, or total peace, policy for these dynamics, the story dates back nearly a decade to the signing of the Havana Peace Accords between the Colombian government and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, most often referred to as the FARC for its initials in Spanish. This historical backdrop is essential to understanding how Colombia's security dynamics may evolve in the coming years. Presidential elections are approaching in May 2026, and violence may become a vehicle for criminal groups to insert their agendas into the political arena. Meanwhile, the Colombian government is getting less support from the United States, a shift that has serious implications for the state's ability to confront increasingly complex criminal threats. A violent start. The start of 2025 brought one of the year's major criminal confrontations, which was the breakdown of a non-aggression pact between the National Liberation Army, or ELN for its Spanish initials, and the 33rd Front of the General Staff of Blocks in Front, a FARC dissident faction. In Catatumbo, a region of Norte de Santander, more than 64,000 people were displaced, nearly 13,000 were forcibly confined, and at least 117 were killed between January and April 2025, according to the Ombudsman's Office. Catatumbo is the main coca enclave in northern Colombia and a strategic corridor for armed groups operating along the Venezuelan border, which has become a refuge for several of Colombia's guerrilla organizations. But Norte de Santander is only one of at least 10 hotspots of violence identified by the Ombudsman's Office. Chocó, Nariño, Cauca, Valle de Cauca, Antioquia, Arauca, Meta, and Putumayo and Guaviare also saw territorial clashes in 2025 over corridors essential to criminal economies, including drug trafficking and illegal mining. These clashes reflect a broader shift toward the territorialization of armed groups' operations, said Laura Bonilla, Deputy Director of the Fundación Paz y Reconciliación, a civil society organization focused on Colombia's conflict. Criminal groups are now focused on controlling territories crucial to illegal economies, rather than challenging the state for national power as they did in past decades. What we have today is a set of armed groups deeply connected to organized crime, if not directly providing services to organized crime, Bonilla told Insight Crime. Colombia remains the world's largest producer of cocaine, and the groups driving the violence are also the main engines of the drug trade. But cocaine is no longer their only business. Territorial control provides them with access to multiple revenue streams, including illegal mining, contraband, extortion, kidnapping, migrant smuggling, and wood trafficking. These illegal profits have fueled the military muscle of armed groups. Between December 2024 and July 2025, the number of combatants grew by 15%, according to Colombia's security forces. This coincides with the steady territorial expansion of criminal groups since at least 2018. Total Peace, Petro's flagship security policy, which involves parallel negotiations with various illegal armed groups, contributed to this strengthening by creating conditions for bilateral ceasefires. But it is far from the only factor behind today's criminal dynamics. The apex of criminal fragmentation. Colombia's various peace initiatives have triggered shifts in the country's criminal landscape, often producing fragmentation and realignment. After the demobilization of the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, or AUC, in 2006, at least 30 criminal groups emerged, seeking to fill the power vacuum. After violent turf wars, the Gaitanist Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, also known as the Gaitanistas or the Gulf Clan, consolidated as the primary heirs to the AUC. A decade later, the 2016 demobilization of the FARC marked another turning point. Until then, the FARC controlled around 70% of Colombia's coca crops, and their departure from the criminal arena left substantial gaps in strategic territories along the cocaine supply chain. Armed groups such as the ELN and the Gaitanistas quickly expanded into former FARC areas. Meanwhile, dissident and rearmed FARC factions emerged, seeking to retain influence in key areas, including the Venezuelan border, the Department of Chocó near Panama, and Colombia's southwest region bordering Ecuador. These waves of fragmentation altered how criminal groups operate. The factions that emerged after the demobilization processes have organizational structures and objectives markedly different from their predecessors. These organizations are increasingly less hierarchical, with weaker command and control structures and greater territorial autonomy, said Andrés Cajillo, coordinator of the Peace and Conflict Negotiations programs at the FIP. It's a conflict and a set of confrontations that are increasingly fragmented, making them harder to analyze and address. Negotiations with the government have opened up internal fractures in groups, such as the EMC, Second Marquetalia, and the ELN. These groups operate autonomously in specific territories and connect with other actors through alliances that can break at any moment. That intensifies the fight for territorial control. What's coming is a high level of confrontation, Bonilla said. Whoever proves the most capable in this cycle of violence survives and absorbs the others. A peak in violence at the worst possible moment. In October 2025, the Trump administration added Petro, along with his wife, son, and Interior Minister Armando Benedetti, to the U.S. Treasury Department's sanction list, which includes individuals accused of ties to drug trafficking or organized crime. Trump also announced cuts to aid given to Colombia, accusing Petro, without evidence, of links to drug trafficking. A month earlier, in September, the U.S. government partially decertified Colombia for its counter-narcotics efforts, alleging Petro's government had failed to control drug production and trafficking, as well as the criminal groups behind it. These measures pose serious risks for Colombia's capacity to fight organized crime at a time when its criminal actors are stronger than ever. The United States has been Colombia's main partner in counter-narcotics and security cooperation for decades, supplying funding for training, equipment, logistical support, and institutional strengthening, and intelligence exchanges. Although Petro's government has made record cocaine seizures, 836 metric tons between January and October 2025, these achievements have been overshadowed by rising coca cultivation and cocaine production potential. While the latest official data has not been released, Colombia reportedly reached a cocaine production potential exceeding 3,000 tons in 2024, according to El País newspaper, citing an unpublished excerpt from the annual report on coca cultivation. Presidential elections under criminal pressure. Colombia is preparing to elect a new president in 2026. In November 2025, Nestor Gregorio Vera, alias Ivan Mordisco, top commander of the EMC, announced in response to government bombings that the group would resort to political violence ahead of the 2026 elections. "We wanted the 2026 electoral process to have the least possible disruptions," Mordisco said in a statement. "But given the offensive by warmongering sectors, we have no choice but to defend our territories, their tranquility, and political paths free from warmongering and corruption." 8 departments face a high risk of political violence during the elections, including Norte de Santander, Arauca, Bichada, La Guajira, Chocó, Nariño, and Cauca. Criminal governments and territorial control in these regions directly undermine free political participation. A very complex security scenario is expected, not only because armed groups are stronger, but also because they increasingly have stakes in parliamentary and presidential elections, Cahijo said. "This violence has already begun. Miguel Uribe Turbay, a right-wing presidential primary candidate, died in August 2025 after being shot in June during a rally in a park in Bogotá. Investigations continue, but prosecutors' leading hypothesis points to the second Marcatalia. With total peace, armed groups increasingly see the electoral outcome as central to their long-term projections," Cahijo noted. "The groups have used negotiations for military and strategic advantage, and to secure political concessions. In this context, the 2026 elections will define far more than a change in leadership. At stake are the continuity or overhaul of the total peace approach and the future of Colombia's counter-narcotics policy." This was Colombia's Total Peace Remains in Pieces, published January 5th, 2026, written by Sara Garcia and read by me, Henry Schuldiner. To hear more of our audio stories, podcasts, and long-form narrative journalism, follow Inside Crime on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. And for more from our annual GameChangers series, analyzing organized crime dynamics throughout Latin America in 2025, and to sign up for our donor-exclusive event where we'll discuss the series, visit insidecrime.org. Thanks for listening.